Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., September 12, 2011. To the Senate. Under provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher A. Coons, a senator from the state of Delaware, to perform the duties of the chair. Son Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Majority Leader.
Calling into leader remarks, the Senate will begin morning business until 4:30 p.m. today. At that time, the Senate will resume consideration of H.J. Res. 66. At 5:30, there will be a cloture vote on the motion to proceed H.J. Res. 66. At 5:50, members will gather in the rotunda to proceed to the 9/11 Remembrance Ceremony on the east front of the Capitol. Mr. President, I remember Tuesday, September 11th, very, very clearly. 2:19 is where Senator Daschle held his Tuesday morning leadership meeting, which started at 9 o'clock. I was the first senator in that room, and John Breaux of Louisiana came in a short time later, and he said, something's going on in New York. Flip on the TV, and we did, and there was a tower burning. We thought, boy, how could an airplane run into that tower? We basically didn't pay any attention to that TV. We turned it off because there was a meeting there. We assembled for our meeting. Senator Daschle called it to order, and just a short time after the meeting was started, he got a note. Somebody came in and took him out, and he came back and said, we got to vacate the building. There's an airplane headed toward the Capitol. So, of course, we all hurriedly left at 2:19, and I remember that day so very, very clearly. Senator Nichols, who was the my Republican counterpart, Senator Trent Lott was Senator Daschle's counterpart, and the four of us were taken off the west front of the Capitol to a secret location where we spent most all the day. The Vice President was there and kept us informed as to what was going on. As we left that 2:19, Mr. President, you could look out the window and see the smoke billowing out of the Pentagon. It was a very difficult day for all of us. Yesterday, we observed the 10th anniversary of those attacks. But the truth is, I remember that day as if it were only yesterday. That day, Osama bin Laden and his radical followers didn't just launch an attack on planes or buildings. They launched an attack on the American spirit. They launched an attack on our freedom and our democracy. But rather than being crippled by the terrible acts of these madmen, rather than allowing the uncertainty and fear to rule us, this nation rose again stronger than ever. And we really did it in one way, and that was by coming together. The darkness that day reminded us of our collective strength and power. It reminded us that there is nothing we cannot achieve together as one nation, under God, indivisible, and of course with liberty and justice for all. So we pledged to bring justice to the perpetrators of those terrible acts. And we followed through on that pledge with an unfaltering campaign to dismantle al-Qaeda and its supporters. This year, our brave Navy SEALs and others gave Osama bin Laden his due. We also pledged to rebuild, and I'm very happy to see the proud towers of the new World Trade Center rising from the ashes of Ground Zero. That doesn't mean the memory of that day is not painful, because it is, especially to those who lost loved ones. Thousands of people lost loved ones. Nothing can ever make up for the loss of a mother or father, a son or daughter, a brother or a sister, a friend or a spouse who was just catching a plane, going to work, or at work on that horrific day. They're the reason we'll never forget, ever. So today, as yesterday, I honor the memory of the thousands of innocent people who died at the World Trade Center, at the Pentagon, and on the hijacked planes in New York and Pennsylvania and Virginia. I honor the memory of the firefighters who knew the danger they faced when they entered those buildings, but went in anyway. I honor the police and rescue workers who rushed to the scene and combed through the debris, some of whom died that day. I honor the many dedicated members of our armed forces, our State Department, the United States Agency for International Development, and our intelligence community who have sacrificed their lives to keep us safe and keep September 11th from ever happening again. Today, at approximately 6 o'clock, we'll gather, as I've indicated, on the east front of the Capitol. And looking at the program, I see the final thing that will happen there is one of the military bands and choir will sing God Bless America. That happened on September 11th. Senator Dash and I had come back. We gathered on the front of the Capitol. And we really were there not knowing what to do. We just wanted to be together. And as I remember, Senator Mikulski said in her usual, her voice that demands attention, she said, "Let's sing God Bless America," and we did. I don't know how well we sang it, but it was a memorable event. And so I will remember that very clearly tonight when we close our recognition ceremony out there on the east front of the Capitol, singing God Bless America, something that we did 10 years ago. Mr. President, I honor America's spirit of perseverance and commitment to freedom. May we never forget. Did the Chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. And under the previous order, the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4:30 p.m., with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
I would ask the Chair begin the calling of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
I ask unanimous consent that proceedings under the call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to proceed for 15 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, last month's dire economic news is a call to urgent action to get America working again. In August, our nation produced no net new jobs. Productivity fell. Home sales fell. Construction spending fell. The manufacturing index declined. Unemployment is stagnant at 9.1%, and consumer confidence is plummeting. Businesses, our nation's job creators and the engine of any lasting economic growth, have been saying for some time that the lack of jobs is largely due to a climate of uncertainty, most notably the uncertainty and cost created by new federal regulations. Mr. President, the Regulatory Time Out Act, which I am introducing today with 14 of my colleagues, provides job creators with a sensible breather from these burdensome new regulations. This would give businesses time to get back on their feet, create the jobs that Americans so desperately need, and enhance the global competitiveness of American workers. Now, let me make clear that we also need to reform the process for issuing regulations. Earlier this year, I proposed the CURB Act, which stands for Clearing Unnecessary Regulatory Burdens. The CURB Act would require agencies to examine the costs and benefits of proposed rules, prohibit them from attempting to set rules through unofficial guidance documents, thus circumventing the public notice comment period, and provide businesses with relief from first-time paperwork violations when no harm comes from the violation. Senators Barrasso and Roberts joined me in introducing this bill. Indeed, Mr. President, as I'm sure you're aware, many of our colleagues have recognized the need to reform the regulatory process and have introduced their own proposals. The Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee has already held 3 hearings on regulatory reform this year, and I expect that this issue will be a priority for our committee this fall. But, Mr. President, the fact is our economy cannot wait for Congress to complete an overhaul of the regulatory process. If we want to create more jobs, we must act now. We must send a clear signal to the job creators that we have heard them. That is why I believe we must have a time out from any significant new regulation that would have an adverse impact on jobs, the economy, or our international competitiveness. Under my bill, no significant final rule that would have an adverse impact could go into effect during a 1-year moratorium. This timeout would cover major rules costing more than $100 million per year and other rules that have been considered as significant under executive orders going back to President Clinton and followed by President George W. Bush and President Obama. Mr. President, let me give you an example of a rule that would be covered by the one-year moratorium that I am proposing. A rule that would be covered by this definition is EPA's Boiler MACT rule. I'm sure that the presiding officer is familiar with this rule. This one regulation, if it were fully implemented, could cost Maine's employers alone hundreds of millions of dollars. In fact, as the Wall Street Journal has recently reported, a job study just released shows that the Boiler MACT, along with other pending air regulations, could cause 36 pulp and paper mills around the country to actually close, putting more than 20,000 Americans out of work. That's 18% of that industry's workforce. That shows you the potent and terrible impact that excessive regulation can have on job preservation and job creation. And that's just for starters. Once these mills close, the businesses that supply them would also be forced to lay off workers. Estimates are that nearly 90,000 Americans would lose their jobs, wages would drop by $4 billion, and government at all levels would see revenues decline by a staggering $1.3 billion. That's why, Mr. President, along with Senator Ron Wyden, I've introduced a Boiler MACT bill that 24 of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle have already co-sponsored. Our bill has been endorsed by 292 employer organizations and individual businesses. 292 businesses and organizations representing employers. That shows you just how worried our job creators are about the impact of just this one set of rules. Their letter sums up the impact of the boiler rules very plainly. It says, these rules place at risk tens of thousands of high-paying manufacturing jobs that our nation cannot afford to lose. I ask unanimous consent that this endorsement letter and the Wall Street Journal article highlighting the job study be printed in the record at the conclusion of my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Boiler MACT regulations are exactly the kind of significant rules that my Regulatory Timeout Act is intended to reach. The moratorium applies to rules issued by independent regulatory agencies, such as the National Labor Relations Board, as well as executive branch departments. The impact of the regulatory burden under President Obama can be seen in the pages of the Federal Register. As my colleagues know, the Federal Register is the publication for all federal regulations. Last year alone, the Federal Register expanded by nearly 82,600 pages, a level higher than any year under President Bush. Worse yet, the Obama administration has 144 rules in the pipeline that would each cost the economy at least $100 million. This is nearly twice as high as the number of such rules that were in the pipeline each year of the Bush administration. Now, Mr. President, let me clarify that the legislation I am proposing exempts those rules that are needed in emergencies, such as imminent threats to public health or safety, as well as rules that are necessary to enforce our criminal laws and with respect to military or foreign affairs. So I think it's important that I put that on the record. It also exempts rules that would reduce the regulatory burden in order to help the private sector create jobs and boost the ability of American workers to compete. Unfortunately, those rules that actually reduce regulatory burdens and promote jobs are few and far between. Finally, Mr. President, my bill requires that within 10 days of passage, agencies and departments must submit to Congress and to the Office of Management and Budget the list of rules that they believe are exempt from the one-year moratorium. That's important to make sure that the intent of the law would be followed and that Congress and the administration can exercise appropriate oversight. Mr. President, the intent of my bill is to lift the cloud of uncertainty that is causing employers to be cautious and to refrain from creating jobs, jobs that our economy desperately needs. Mr. President, during the August recess, I asked employers throughout the great state of Maine what it would take to encourage them to add jobs. To a person, no matter what line of business these employers were in, no matter what the size of their workforce, each one of them replied that Washington needed to stop imposing crushing new regulations, that these job creators needed stable, pro-growth economic policies, that they needed an end to the uncertainty that was hampering their decision-making. I'm pleased that the Regulatory Timeout Act has been endorsed by the NFIB, our nation's largest small business advocacy group, and by the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council. My bill has also been welcomed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which has stated, quote, American businesses need immediate relief. A timeout would allow both the regulators and the regulated to take a deep breath and ensure that regulations are not destroying jobs and economic growth. Mr. President, I agree completely. I would ask that the letters from the NFIB and the SBIC and the statement by the Chamber of Commerce all be printed in the record at the conclusion of my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I'm honored to have the following colleagues as co-sponsors of this one-year regulatory moratorium: Senators Alexander, Barrasso, Blunt, Boozman, Chambliss, Coates, Coburn, Cornyn, Hoeven, Hutchinson, Isakson, Kyles, Moran, and Thune. Mr. President, I urge all of our colleagues to support the Regulatory Timeout Act, which is a critical step toward easing the regulatory uncertainty and costs that are keeping our job creators from getting Americans back to work. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of the quorum and
Clerk.
yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka?
Under the call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that I introduce the bill at this point and that it be appropriately referred.
The bill will be received and appropriately referred.
Thank you, Mr. President. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka?
from Indiana.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the call of quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we all heard the President speak to a joint session of Congress last week about his proposal to bring forward a jobs bill that was released this morning, and the President indicated that he wanted to take his case to the people. And I'm glad he's doing so. I hope that as he travels about the country, I think he'll be hearing what many of us heard during the August recess when we were back at home, as I traveled across the state of Indiana and talked to people from all different categories of work engagement, small to medium to large businesses, homeowners, other constituents. One thing came through loud and clear, and that was I needed to listen to them more than they needed to listen to me. What was on their mind, I hope, is what the President will be hearing as he travels across the country to talk about his jobs plan, because clearly on the minds of the American people was the jobs and the lack of jobs for many who were struggling through a very, very difficult time of unemployment. Students were graduating from college with no place to go. People in middle age were being laid off or terminated, unable to find new work. Clearly, we have a jobs crisis in this country. It has lasted now for some time. We've been in a deep recession, hopefully pulling out of that, but latest indicators are that things are pretty stagnant. In fact, the latest facts that came forward in the August reports were that our job growth is zero, and our economy growth is zero, and therefore job growth is zero. And so we've got some work to do. So we need to look carefully at the proposal the President brought for us. But again, getting back to the central point I'm trying to make, what he'll hear, I believe, from the American people, at least he'll hear that if he stops in Indiana, is that there is a great cloud of uncertainty hanging over the future. And because of that, people are holding back on spending, businesses are holding back on hiring. And there certainly is not the confidence, and we've seen that confidence indicator drop and drop and drop, confidence in the future that we have our act together, that we're pulling out of this recession, that we can look forward to a brighter tomorrow because our economy will be growing and we'll be adding more people. That uncertainty results from a number of factors. Clearly, we have been in a downturn and we're trying to climb out of that. But clearly also there is uncertainty about what policies will be coming out of Washington that will affect the job creators, will affect consumers, and will affect others as they contemplate decisions regarding how to go forward, whether it's spending or whether it's producing. One of those key indicators is the uncertainty over what the tax code will bring regarding the taxing of profits or income or revenue that comes into America's companies. And I'd like to highlight one of those because it's important to the state of Indiana, but I think it also makes the larger point. There are industries that can be very much an essential part of our future, that can and are providing for essential employment at higher than average wages, at a good skill level, that holds a lot of potential for our exporting successfully overseas as well as providing necessary product here at home. And one of those industries is centrally located in Indiana. In fact, one of our top industries, and particularly an industry with significant growth over the last decade or so or more, and that's the medical device industry. And yet the medical device industry, because of its success, was targeted during the formation of the health care plan that was proposed by the President and passed by this Congress in the last session. That bill imposed a tax increase on the medical device industry, even though they did not have a direct relationship to what was trying to be accomplished in the Obamacare medical plan. Here's an industry that is a world leader, where the United States is a world leader, an industry that brings in substantial revenue, has seen a significant increase in growth, and holds great potential for the future. And yet, because there was looking for pay-fors for the health care plan, the administration looked at an industry and basically said, well, we can draw some taxes and provide some revenues. Their proposal was to achieve $40 billion over a period of time, all of which would go to help pay for the health care plan. Now, that was reduced through an amendment or through negotiations to $20 billion. Nevertheless, it should have never been put on the plate in the first place. It was there for a revenue raiser and didn't have anything to do with the particular plan that was trying to provide revenues to implement the health care plan. Now, in Indiana, we are one of the world's leaders in the development of medical technologies. It enhances and saves the lives of Hoosiers and patients around the world. We have more than 300 FDA-registered medical device manufacturers employing 20,000 Indiana Hoosiers directly and another 28,000 indirectly. There are more than 400,000 workers employed nationwide by this industry. These are jobs that pay, on average, 41% higher wages than the state wage rate in Indiana. Medical device manufacturing has been a thriving industry. It is critical to our state economy and many states' economies, and I might just list some of those. States such as California, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Wisconsin, and including my state of Indiana, could suffer more job losses if this tax is allowed to go into effect. In fact, a study that has come out produced by the Advanced Medical Technology Association analyzed the potential effect of the health care law's device tax on employment in the medical device industry. And I quote from that report, "Under reasonable assumptions, the tax could result in job losses in excess of 43,000 workers and employment compensation losses in excess of $3.5 billion. That would be a devastating blow to the industry and, of course, to many, many local economies. Beyond that, I have met with these device manufacturers on numerous occasions. And essentially, what they have said to me is, we like working here in Indiana. We like the productivity that we're getting. But if we continue to be taxed and regulated to the point where we are no longer competitive in selling our product worldwide, we have to take a serious look at moving our production overseas. They said, we don't want to do this. We want to stay here. But we need to be competitive, because you have to understand that a lot of our revenue comes from exporting overseas. And, of course, this is what we want to encourage. Our trade balance has always been in deficit, and the more we can export and the more we have cutting-edge industries that can export enhanced products to overseas customers, the better our own economic situation will be here at home. And so at a time when 14 million Americans are looking for work, and at a time when our country has suffered through 31 consecutive months of unemployment above 8%, I think we need to take a close look at the job creators in our country and determine whether or not taxation or regulation that is being imposed on them is having a dramatic impact in our ability to utilize these industries to provide more jobs and more employment, or whether it's just having the opposite effect. And the people that I have talked to have said it's having the opposite effect. Senator Hatch has introduced a bill to repeal this tax. It was controversial when it was first brought forward, and I think the Congress ought to take a look at this. If we want to provide some job-creating opportunities in America, we need to look at the taxes and regulations that are stifling this growth and this ability to hire more people. And so I'm a proud sponsor of Senator Hatch's legislation to repeal that excise tax. It will, as I said, benefit many states and provide many jobs and prevent jobs from leaving. And so I encourage my colleagues in the Senate to join this common-sense legislation and repeal the tax on medical devices. If we want to spur economic growth, it's time we take a closer look at the harmful impacts of the policies which are stifling growth. And this is one industry, and I hope to highlight more in the future, but one industry that clearly is being penalized for being successful. And it's hurting our economy, and it's hurting our ability to provide job growth. So I wish the President well. I hope he listens intently. I hope he hears the same lesson, the same rhetoric that I heard as I traveled around the state of Indiana. In other parts of the country, I believe that the conclusion is inevitable, and that is taxation, regulation, brings in policies coming out of Washington bring uncertainty to the marketplace, and uncertainty to the marketplace affects consumer confidence and affects the confidence in those job creators and employers who are frozen in time, waiting to see how all this is going to turn out, fearful of hiring more people because they don't know what the impact's going to be on their payroll and on their expenses, waiting for the next regulation to come down that might impact their business in a negative way. We need certainty coming out of Washington, not uncertainty. I'm hoping, Mr. President, over the next 2 or 3 months here, as Congress works to come together with a sensible plan to deal with our deficit, we can enact in that plan and communicate to the American people that we have laid a good plan for the future in terms of how to deal with our deficit, and that we can bring some certainty to the future and get our economy back on its right track. With that, Mr. President, I will yield the floor and note the